The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
Well, if you're here, you know why you're here. The Leafs lose another Game 7, probably the worst Game 7 they've lost. Holy shit, this is so bad. Like, I know people are going to look at me and be like, oh, you're not a Leafs fan, who cares? I'm genuinely frustrated for this fan base, for fans. Like, this is bad. This is bad. This is awful. We'll get our thoughts a little bit more coherent for how this debacle went down, but there's no sugarcoating it here. It's bad. That was awful what we witnessed yesterday.
Well, not many teams lose a Game 7 on home ice by 5 goals. I mean, if you want to just start there in the actual details, you know, there was a 7-0 Game 7 with Dallas and Colorado years ago. That stands as the largest margin of defeat in a Game 7. There's been, I think, 201 Game 7s in NHL history. This goes down as one of the small handful of the most lopsided. But you know what else those other series didn't have? They didn't have a Game 5 on home ice for one of the teams where they also lost by 5 goals. You know, that hadn't happened, I think, since 1979 at any point in a series where a team lost back-to-back playoff games by 5 goals or more. I mean, I don't think we need to spend a ton of time picking through the wreckage of this because it's important context for framing where the conversation goes. But, you know, it's a debacle any way you look at it. And, you know, I think that you've got so many, Julian, so many compounding effects here. You've got just a year after year after year after year of playoff disappointments with the same, you know, characters at the top of the lineup. You saw some of the same concerning trends in terms of them not just being able to produce enough. And then after that Game 7, you saw a degree of them turning on each other. And I can't even necessarily say I blame them. I do think that the core four, as we've called it for years and years and years, like all of the pressure has been put on them. Obviously, they're all getting paid among the top guys in the league. Like I'm not saying that they don't deserve that pressure, but I think that they cracked under it, right? And I think to a degree it's understandable. To me, this is why I've written at least like 4 times, I think, after a season, like they have to change this mix. I don't think it's because the individuals all suck. In fact, I believe whichever players end up moving on from here will have lots of success still in their NHL career somewhere else, different environments, different markets, different team environment, like things. I think there are bright days ahead still for the players individually, but collectively, it's been clear for some time it was the wrong mix to get it done under the playoff pressure cooker, and that was again proven right in my opinion. The Panthers spent a lot of time after both Game 5 and Game 7 saying the differences were small. And that might be kind of true. Hockey's like that. But when you lose 6-1 in 2 games to end a playoff series, it's the second round. I know that there are small things if you really want to squint hard and say like there's small bits of progress. This was a better season for the Maple Leafs. Like there's no doubt in my mind about that. Like I think they were a much better team through the regular season. I think that they were more equipped still for playoff hockey, even the way it ended. I do believe they took some positive steps forward, but it's just not good enough. And now it's too late, right? Now it's too late. The Leafs have lost control of this situation as an organization because Mitch Marner can be a free agent. They no longer, you draft a player, Julian, you get their rights for 7 years. You have a 7-year guaranteed window where you basically, obviously players can sign off for sheets and other things, but it doesn't happen a lot in the sport. But you get a guaranteed 7-year window. With this court ended up being 9 years because Mitch Marner signed a 6-year deal after his 3-year entry-level contract. But now they don't have control over him. And, it does appear to me like he's just going to walk away in free agency. And so that's obviously just a massive hole in your lineup. Whatever you think of Mitch Marner, it's hard to paint potentially losing a 102-point score for nothing as a positive. Like it's hard to imagine where it gets better. I realize that comes with more cap space to spend elsewhere, but there aren't very many Mitch Marners growing on trees. In fact, there's only one, and that's why he's going to chase this free agency because he's going to have some unique and lucrative opportunities out there for him. So yeah, this is bad because they kept doing the same thing over and over and over and over. They didn't get to a better place. And this morning, I mean, look, you look at the paying customers of this team, the fans. I mean, they're fed up. I don't condone anyone throwing jerseys on the ice during a game, beers on the ice during play like that. But look, that's a sign of you're not serving the people that pay your salaries, the people that have made this team what it is over 100 plus years. I mean, you can't deny the passion is a real thing. Passion can be a good thing. Passion, when it goes the other way, is people throwing $100, $300 jerseys on the ice and, kind of being idiots. But I get it because the people have lost the faith in the team. And I don't know where they go from here. I'm sure we're going to dig into that with some individual conversations, but that's the place to start. Like, I saw Edward Rogers walking through the bowels of the arena after Game 7. Like, he looked angry, as you would expect. I mean, he owns a team like that. If you can only imagine how bad that feels when it's your team. Anyway, it's I don't have a lot of words today. Like, I don't have as much fire for you as you might expect. It almost just feels like we all kind of knew this. We've all just seen this so often, and we've had these discussions. And with each passing year, they take on less urgency because now it's just so friggin' obvious. And you just wonder what could have been. Going back to 2021, to me, when they blew that series to Montreal, certainly by 2023, when Kyle Dubas was ready to break up this core of players and got fired instead, you just wonder what could have been. There's an alternate universe that you can't go down now. And instead, I think you're left. Certainly at minimum, it's just likely to be a small step back next year. And you're hoping for maybe some other way to reload. And then at the extreme end of that, who knows? Maybe this is truly the end for maybe the cuts and the firings and everything go even deeper than I'm imagining as we sit here today.
Could we start with what could be next with players before we get to management? I think that's probably the right way to go about it. Like, we know Marner is going to test free agency at this point. What about John Tavares? What about some other changes they could make for this team?
I should stop you there because we don't know Marner's going to test free agency. Here's what I know from, my reporting. It's his intention to test free agency. Like, I think right now, if he's sitting here on this call with us and he's being honest, he's going to say, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Like, I think in his mind, he's gone. But in reality, there's still 6 weeks here before he is a free agent. And I think we have to leave open the possibility something that surprises us happens. Who knows what ownership, what management could bring to him? Who knows who's even making that call, right? I mean, as we're sitting here right now, we don't even know what the top of the Leafs management structure is going to look like come July 1st. And so I don't want to put a percentage on it. I think it's a small percentage that he's back or that they could ever entice him to stay. But I think we have to leave open the possibility that something could happen we don't see coming. But, at this point, he rode out this season for the opportunity to go to July 1st. And so why would he sign now? I mean, unless they offer him, I guess it's sort of like anything. Maybe if they could offer him some amount of money that you just can't refuse or something. But even would that make sense? Does that achieve? It's great a player as he is. And that's why I'm not, this isn't really aimed at Mitch. It's just more like, spending more money to keep this core together. Are we not having this conversation again in 2026, in April or May? So I don't know what happens there. The easiest decision they have this offseason to me is re-signing Matthew Knies. I think he had a really positive step this season. He performed in the playoffs. Unfortunately, was injured by the end. I was told he had a bone bruise that he was dealing with after Game 6 and, played through pain in Game 7. But, given how young he is, given how few players the Leafs have, been able to bring along in these years, which again is totally normal. When you're trying to win the cup every year, you're just going to trade a bunch of draft picks away. Like I'm not actually criticizing them for that. I would be criticizing them more if they didn't trade draft picks away and try to win. Now we can criticize the decisions they made, what they got back for those picks, how this all went down. But when you're this deep with the core as the Leafs are, you're not going to have a lot of younger players. But Matthew Knies is one the Leafs have, and so I think locking him up, before at the soonest possibility makes sense as a restricted free agent. Tavares will be an interesting one. He really wants to stay. He made that clear. He was emotional after the game last night, and he did take some ownership. He said, "I've been here for 7 years, and we haven't got it done." I think fans are looking for a little more ownership at times in those settings. He took that. He didn't shy away from that, but he also said, "I'm not giving up. I want another opportunity." He's invested arguably more into this than some of the others, even though the others have been here longer, because he made the free agent decision to come back here, right? And you look at the other teams that he didn't sign with at that time. Get a chance to go to Boston, which obviously played for a Stanley Cup during this 7-year window in 2019. He had a chance to go to Tampa, which won 2 Stanley Cups in that window of time and lost another. He said no to Dallas, which has been a top team in the league. Now, they haven't won a Stanley Cup, but they're still playing today. And look, this is all sliding doors. I mean, if he signs a big contract to those teams 7 years ago, I don't know what history would have had in store, what cost it would have had them on other aspects of the roster. But I'm just saying the teams he said no to, I didn't mention San Jose, and they didn't end up having a cup window really in that time. But he made a decision to come home to Toronto to win a cup. I mean, you get to his stage in life, in his career. He's had a fantastic career. He's got 1,000 points, 1,000+ games. He's done pretty much everything you could want to win except for win a Stanley Cup. He's poured a lot into this. And so what happens with him, I feel like it's so tied to the other decisions, it's hard to know with certainty. But I think what's likely to happen is they're going to play hardball with him and really impress upon him the need to take something resembling a hometown discount to stay. And, we'll see if he's willing to do that. The hard part when you're recording hours, we're not even 12 hours after this loss, is you don't know what an earthquake the ending was, right? Like, it's hard to know, like, the way it ended, which is where you started the show correctly. Like, I don't know how that changes the view of even the players, like, privately. And there hasn't been time for the ground to stop shaking and to get a sense of where the landscape sits. But, I think that he'll probably be given a chance to come back if he's willing to do it below market value. And, that's a decision he'll have to make. And then if Marner really is gone, I mean, at minimum, you've got to sign another player to play in your top 6, I would think. It's not a great free agent market. I mean, Brad Marchand's on the market, potentially. Patrick
Maybe
Kane,
the Leafs sign Brad Marchand. Maybe they do that.
Shane. Maybe, I think I've heard Brad Marchand could get $8 million a year as a free agent. So I don't know if that'll make sense for the Leafs. I mean, it's, again, like I'm not going to sit here and say it won't make sense, but it might not make sense. I mean, he made the revelation after the game that he's a Leafs fan as part of his I found very interesting the way the Panthers approached this loss, or the Leafs loss. I mean, like talking about, I mean, they really went in deep without much prodding. Like, for anyone who missed the context, like, I assume most people listening to this didn't watch the actual press conferences. Like, Brad Marchand wasn't asked, like, what do you think of Leafs fans putting pressure on the team? Like, he went there on his own. Paul Maurice went there on his own, with his whole soliloquy on how, the pressure and scrutiny the Leafs are under is good for the rest of the NHL. It's why everyone makes so much money, but it's bad for the Leafs that there's a cost on a human cost on their players and their families, which I actually believe that statement to be true. I should say, but Marchand did say as part of his comments that he's a Leaf fan himself, which is just delicious when you think that he's the first player in NHL history to have 5 Game 7 wins over the same franchise. And I know his teams won those games. He didn't individually score 10 goals in each game to win them, but I mean, you've always got the sense that Brad Marchand drank Leafs fans' tears. You know what I mean? Like, that's what on his off night, you always got the sense he reveled in. Well, first of all, I think he likes a big stage, like, which is a compliment. Like, he was awesome in this series. Like, just awesome. Oldest player in the series. I don't know how long he can play at this level. You know what I mean? Like, there's not a guarantee when they get to the Eastern Conference Final, he's going to be a world beater. Like it's hard to know. But for 2 weeks in May, the third line of the Florida Panthers made the biggest individual difference in the series. I'd say that, and probably goaltending. There's the other sliding doors moment of this series is what happens if Anthony Stolarz doesn't get injured. I think he's probably about half a goal against better per game than Joseph Woll. And that half a goal could have, in a series that gets decided in 7 games, even with the 2 blowouts the Panthers had, the Leafs lose game 3 up 3-1 in that game, up 2-0 in that game in overtime. You can always twist yourself into a pretzel saying coulda, woulda, shoulda, what might have been. But anyway, Marchand was a huge game breaker for the Panthers in this series. And so who do they sign? That's kind of the list. There's not a lot of talent. Nick Ehlers is out there, but what makes this free agency so appealing for the players is every team has money, right? The cap's going up for everybody by a significant margin, and it's going up again the year after and again the year after. That's already locked in. So everybody has money to spend all of a sudden, and there's just not enough good players to spend it on. And that's the opportunity for Mitch Marner and for Ehlers and Marchand and Kane and down the list of guys that, Brock Nelson that can become UFAs on July 1st is they all can get a raise if that's what they're seeking in free agency. If they're willing to go to any team if they're willing to go to the highest bidder, there's going to be some high bids, if you know what I'm saying.
I know you don't have a crystal ball, but is there a world where the Leafs just say they let Mitch Marner go, they sign John Tavares to another contract, you run it back with Nylander, Matthews, Tavares, you add someone else, and that leads to more success? Like, is that enough for this team? I feel like part of me thinks maybe it isn't. Maybe you have to do something a little bit more drastic. Maybe there needs to be a bigger shock to the system. But is it just as easy, so to speak, as to just say remove one core part of the core 4 and then move on from there? Again, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but like, I'm just trying to figure out like how it could work for the Leafs to potentially get more success.
Well, if you go down that path, to my eyes, you're probably taking a step back in the immediate term. Let's not get this twisted. I mean, Mitch Marner was the Leafs' top penalty killing option. As I mentioned, he had 102 points this season. I mean, he was an offensive machine in the regular season, and to a lesser degree in the playoffs, which is where some of the criticism really got ramped up in recent years. And I think ultimately if there's 2 things that have made Toronto not a place that Mitch Marner is all that eager to keep playing in, it would be his original contract negotiation back in 2019, which he and his camp extended into training camp. He signed after a day or 2 of missing camp that year. But that's when the fans started to turn on him. And, Mitch gave interviews at that time, said it was the first time he'd ever been yelled at. He was walking his dog once, and some guy that summer was yelling, like, why don't you have a contract? And people started talking a lot about his dad and what role his dad may or may not have played in those negotiations. And Mitch kind of bristled at his family being brought into it. And then on top of that, in the 6 years that followed, when the playoff success wasn't there, a lot of it was aimed his way. And I will say, much of it justified. But I'm aware of a few incidents that Mitch had to deal with, and there's probably more that I don't know about, where it bordered on harassment, and it was very uncomfortable for him and people he cares about. And, there's even an incident after this game that we're not going to get into here because I don't want to give it any more life. But, it crossed the line a lot of times with some of the, whatever we want to call them, the fanatics in the fan base, the crazies, people almost took it too personally, I think. And it became not a place that Mitch loves being in. I mean, you look at it on paper and you're like, okay, you're going to draft a kid. Your team is absolute junk, which is where the Leafs were back in 2015 when they drafted Mitch Marner 4th overall. You're going to get this kid, and he wasn't a sure bet at the time. I mean, he's very talented, obviously had a great junior career, fantastic career, but there was debate among scouts and people about how impactful someone of his size would be in the NHL. You draft that kid. He's a hometown kid. Just as your team is arcing up, he helps fuel that arc up. He's immediately a star. Within 9 years, he's the 5th highest scoring player in a 110-year-old franchise history. like you say that story, the outline of that story, you're like, this should be a fairy tale. This is what they make sports movies about. But it's not been a fairy tale for Mitch Marner, and it's not been a fairy tale for the team at times, and for obviously the fans too. Like, this relationship didn't work, hasn't worked as well as you'd think. And, I think now that Mitch is at a point where he has the ability to make that decision, he's earned that contractual right. It takes players a long time to have a chance to become UFAs in the league. And I think we should remind everyone of that, no matter what team you cheer for. Is like, this is, at the end of the day, this is business, and he's earned the chance to pursue business this way. But I think Toronto's not become the best place for him to live year round. And, he's obviously just, had a baby boy. His wife, Stephanie, had a baby between rounds 1 and 2. And I think this is probably a good time maybe to just, see what else is out there in the world. He's almost like the kid because of, he went and lived in London, obviously played for the London Knights, but it's like he never got a chance to leave home. A lot of people leave their hometown to go at university, and you kind of grow up and you see what else is out there in the world. And maybe you move back to your hometown, but maybe you don't. I feel like he never fully got to spread his wings, and it just hasn't worked in a lot of ways. And it's taken a toll on the guy. So I'm not saying feel bad for him. I get it. Part of being a public athlete, part of making the money he makes is you have to live your life in public, and you're open to this kind of scrutiny and all these sorts of things. Like, this is part of the deal, but it will probably be more muted elsewhere. And so, I can't remember where I started on this.
No,
buddy,
you're good.
I haven't slept much in the last month and a half, but
you're good.
I'm just saying that
you're good.
I'm just saying that I can see how he got to a point where this makes sense for him to likely move on. And so how do you replace that? That was where you started. You can't replace him. But what you do, I think, as the organization is you make some short-term decisions. Like, to me, the best bets would be don't tie up that money immediately into something long-term, and be well-positioned, because we're about to enter what could be the most interesting era of player transfers the next year or 2 or 3, whatever it ends up being, in a long, long, long time. Like there's not a lot of recent precedent for, I think, what could happen. And so if you're the Leafs, I think you need to try to be nimble. I don't know if they can get in on any of what may or may not happen. Other free agents that come online. I don't mean summer 2025. You start to look at 2026, 2027. Are there major trades? I think that you want to be smart short term with what you do with that cap space, because there could be still some opportunities there. And really, realistically, a team with a pretty solid blue line, which I think the Leafs will have, a team that still has Auston Matthews and William Nylander at minimum, plus, really good support players like Matthew Knies, plus whoever you sign in free agency. Like, that should still be a team that's competing for the playoffs if it's managed correctly. And so there might be a small step back post Marner, but there's a world where you reload and you make some decisions. The Panthers are the best example of this. Like, they should be the gold standard for everybody. But remember, this franchise won 4 playoff series in 26 years. The first 26 years as the organization, they had 17 head coaches in that time. 4 playoff series wins. They hired Paul Maurice in June 2022. They've now won 9 series with Paul Maurice. So they've had all of the franchise's all-time success and then some in the last 3 years. But what did they do around that time as well? They moved on from Jonathan Huberdeau. They made a blockbuster trade and added Matthew Tkachuk. They obviously made smart bets on guys like Sam Reinhart, Sam Bennett, all kinds of other moves too. We can go down the list. They got Gustav Forsling off the scrap heap and then signed him to just an absolute value contract. A team like the Leafs, there is an alternate door here. As much as you're losing something, there's ways that you can improve. You can make incremental improvements and still end up where you want to get to. What's their window? To me, they got 3 years of Auston Matthews under contract. That's now the window. It's like, what can we do with those 3 years? And if you're moving on from him, which I'm here for, I think that this is so far down the road that I'm here for any conversation you want to have. I don't think anything can be removed as a possibility at this stage. But if you're going to stay on with Matthews, You've got 3 years to get it right, and then you're probably rebuilding at that point in time. And, it doesn't mean, look, maybe they do reload, it starts to work, they extend Matthews, and maybe that window goes on. But right now, that's kind of the guaranteed window for me. And so, we got to figure out who's making those calls, who's making those decisions. But that's probably going to be the focus as of a couple of days from now as they, run headfirst into the offseason.
Okay, so you brought up the shock to the system that Florida had to get to. I just want to make this one quick thing before we get to management here. That's what I think this team ultimately needs. I'm not saying you package Auston Matthews in a deal, but like the Huberdeau Weegar trade. Like in Toronto, everyone's familiar with the Kawhi Leonard, DeMar DeRozan trade. I think this Leafs team needs some kind of similar shock to the system. You go down that alternate door and something changes because you can't just run it back with some of the same characters.
You know what, though? They've needed that change. Like, they squandered this because they had a chance to make that change in 2023 before any no movement clauses were involved in those decisions. Obviously, we would have been talking about some blockbuster deal, but they had a chance to trade a Mitch Marner then. And what would they have got for him? And now they're in a position where they probably lose him for nothing. Maybe they trade his rights, right? Carolina traded Jake Gensel's rights last year to Tampa before he signed with the Lightning. They got a 3rd-round pick back. So let's just use that as the best case scenario right now is maybe they get a 3rd-round pick back for Marner's rights. But they're not going to get anything that can make them better next season. And this is where the inaction to me is inexcusable. This is where they should be embarrassed that they let their product get to the point where it was in games 5 and 7 of this series. That inaction by management, and really I'm talking about Brendan Shanahan at the top of the hockey operations tree. He fired Kyle Dubas when Kyle Dubas wanted to make that change. He was the one who said to the players, we're keeping it together. Look, he believed in them, which is fine. He's allowed to have that belief, but ultimately that's why he's going to answer for this because, he kept thinking, largely due to his own personal experience. He was part of the 1997 Detroit Red Wings. I mean, if you're a Leafs fan today and you're mad, in a weird way, you can blame the 97 Detroit Red Wings for how you got here. Because Shanahan had said repeatedly over the years, I think that he was in his 13th season that year when he won his Stanley Cup. And obviously players like Steve Yzerman had very nearly been traded out of town. I think in 1996, the Red Wings nearly traded Yzerman to Ottawa. They instead, obviously, that didn't happen. And then they have this window where they win in 97, 98, 2002 with Yzerman and Shanahan and others part of that team. And so Shanahan had always believed that you really got to go through some stuff but if you hold on to the special players, it's not a terrible theory, but eventually you have to adapt and change to the information you're getting, to what you're seeing, to the results. And they refuse to. And that to me explains how you get to these 2 6-1 losses and what you saw in that building. Yes, that's fans that are pissed off that they spent $1,000 on tickets and it was a lousy game. That's part of it. But what it also is, it's fans that have doubted, their doubt grew over those years, and they felt like management didn't change. They didn't give any reason to believe it was going to be different. And then obviously those players as a group, I just think you had long since proven it wasn't going to work with them. And so the sliding doors moment to me is now Mitch Marner is likely walking away, right? You're not getting anything back for him. Cap space is worth something, but Mitch Marner as a trade asset 2 years ago would have been worth a hell of a lot more. Had they made the decision to make a hard decision at that time. And, this is going to be one of the great what ifs, I believe, in sports. Because if you go back to when Brendan Shanahan was hired, how many things went their way? They hit on Nylander as an 8th pick. They hit on Marner as a 4th pick. You don't always hit when you draft in those spots. They won the lottery the right year when there was an Auston Matthews there rather than a player who's maybe good but not great in terms of their on-ice performance. That team that he inherited, it had really useful at the time younger pieces like a Kadri and Bozak, JVR. It had real NHL players. They let a lot of those guys walk as free agents. In Kadri's case, they made a bad trade. They didn't get enough back for him. I mean, he would still be a helpful piece on today's Maple Leafs. Had he not been traded 5-6 years ago, whatever that was, he could have been helping this team. They had an
1,000%.
absolute. They started with a war chest here, man. They started like as much as I get, did you see the hockey news cover bouncing around from 20 whatever year and say like,
saw that
plan the parade? Here's the thing. That was not a crazy view from the hockey news at that time. Like, that's my opinion. Like that, the Leafs had everything you would want when starting a rebuild, and they didn't maximize it. And look, part of it is the divisional playoff format. Part of it is the Atlantic has been a murderer's row, and they never became the best team in their own division, which is why they haven't got out of the second round, which essentially is like winning your division in the playoff years. But you know, like there are a lot of, and you know, the pandemic hurt their plans because the cap didn't go up. And like, I'm not saying it's all terrible decisions and there wasn't some bad luck in there too, but to me, it's going to go down as one of the great all what ifs. And the ultimate one to me is you already knew by 2023, man. Like you already knew that you knew, and they, you know, anyway, that's what I was thinking of is by the end of this thing. Like last night, I didn't even write an obituary for the team because
you went in on Marner.
No, but we've written that obituary. Like the story hasn't changed, and you know, at a certain point, it's like, okay, like you're already looking ahead the minute the buzzer sounds because you're like, yeah, well, we know why that is. Like this is the wrong mix of guys. Again, not character. I'm not slamming the character of the individuals. I honestly believe like when Mitch Marner goes and signs somewhere else, I believe he's going to have an awesome next second half of his career. Wouldn't surprise me. Like, let's see where he lands and all those things. But it wouldn't surprise me one day we're talking about his redemption arc, that he's pulling the full Phil Kessel, the Nazem Kadri, even the Tyler Bozak, lifting a Stanley Cup somewhere else, having a cup party back in Toronto, probably like those guys did. You know, but it got to the point they weren't going to do it here as a group. And for whatever reason, maybe just being afraid, like the inaction at the top is how you get to last night. I will maintain that. And people can say whatever they want about Leafs fans and it's too much pressure and this and that. Look at other sports. Like, you don't think there's hysteria around Barcelona? You don't think there's hysteria in Glasgow or in other cities where, you know, usually I'm talking about soccer teams in this case, but they are like everybody's life and they are covered. Like there is no nuance to coverage. It is only extreme, you know, adulation or extreme heartache, you know, and those players get paid lots of money and they win titles too. I think if anything, what separates the NHL is how few markets are like Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver, right? It's how few places is there actually hysteria around the team. So if you're playing for those other teams, you're like, yeah, no one even really bugs me. Well, I'm taking my golf cart to the rink. And just not facing the same kind of pressure. Like, and so like, I don't even know if the Panthers are trolling with all this stuff, to be honest. I don't think so. Like, I think they actually look across the hall and go like, wow, like those guys live a totally different life than I do. And they're not a bad team. Like they could have beat us. Like the Panthers know the Leafs could have beat them in that series. Like there's no doubt in my mind. Like the Leafs had the Panthers on the ropes, especially early on, but even after game 6, like, even if we just start where puck drops game 7, like what an opportunity. You fight all year to have that game on home ice and you lay that egg after laying an egg 4 days before. Like anyway, I'm all over the place.
It's inexcusable. No, it's fine.
Inexcusable.
I appreciate you being all over the place with this.
This is why it truly can't be the same. And the beautiful part is we know Leafs management would want to run it back because that's what they've always done. Now the choice is out of their hands, right? Mitch Marner didn't want to negotiate with them all year long. And I can't imagine there's going to be anything like negotiations now unless something totally out of the blue happens, something unexpected happens. But I think everybody understands this is going to be a goodbye. And it's the start of a new era because, you know, that's a big piece walking out your door. And he's 28 years old and he's probably got 10 great years in the NHL left. Wouldn't surprise me.
So who runs things at the top when it's all said and done and the dust settles? Should Brendan Shanahan be given another chance? Is he going to want to move on? What should we consider when it comes to Leafs management and what they could look like over these next coming weeks?
I mean, I can't imagine why he would be given another chance. Even if, look, there's some good in there too. This is a team that had 108 points. Like I think that's the thing is like we have to have which I have to try to strike some context in amongst the hysteria here. But this is a team that had a lot of good things happen this year. I actually think some of the roster decisions were very positive and put them in a position to be in a better spot. But ultimately, it's the same ending, right? So Brendan Shanahan's been here for 11 years. His contract is up. I don't know how you sell that. Like at a certain, even if you love him in the office, is my point here. Even if like ownership is thrilled with the way he is and they like the way he handles stuff behind the scenes, I don't understand from a public relations standpoint. I mean, a pro sports team is almost like a public trust, right? They've clearly lost the trust of the public here. And I think that as a result of that, this is just the nature of the business. Like I'm not sitting here trying to bang the table and wanting people to be unemployed, but I don't see how they bring back the same structure at the top of the organization they've had. And you've already hired Keith Pelley a year ago now to sort of be at the head of the sporting arms of MLSE. You know, Keith himself said last year at the press conference, you might remember, I'm not here to sell jerseys. Well, that's good because people, not only are you not selling jerseys, people would rather throw them off their back on the ice right now than consider supporting this team any longer. And look, I know the fans will be back. This is what sports is. Weirdly, heartbreak, I think it almost deepens the bond with the fan base. As strange as that sounds, I think if you give everyone what they want all the time and you win every year, it's like you almost create a little bit more like, well, you know, at least we've had those good memories. I would be stunned if he's back. I mean, I obviously don't know that he, as of now, it's not like he's been fired or anything like that, but I don't see the path to bring him back. I think the bigger question is, what does the hockey ops department look like in his wake? Did they hire another president, someone between Brad Treliving and basically ownership, which is, you know, Keith Pelley is a representative of ownership? Do they say, hey, we want to keep Brad Treliving, but he's got a lot of experience. Maybe he becomes like a VP and GM, which is, for example, what Ken Holland just became in Los Angeles when he got hired by the Kings. Do they, you know, is Brad Treliving potentially in the line of fire here? You know, it might be the case. And I don't even know if it would be his fault, so to speak. Like he literally got hired 2 off seasons ago. The first one, he didn't have any real, like, yes, he made some poor decisions on July 1st or ones that didn't work out. You know, I'm thinking like John Klingberg signing, things like that. But, you know, he got hired a month before free agency. It wasn't, and the core players had already been told they were being kept. And then by the time it got to last summer, well, you know, everyone had no movement clauses. He sought to rebuild the blue line. I actually think there were some positives of what happened there. My point is, he might be in the wrong place at the wrong time. You know, it's not like he got them in this mess. He just maybe wasn't able to get them out of it in really short order. And then, you know, Craig Berube's a year on the job to see, like, I think everything is on the table, honestly. Like my impression is that an atom bomb could drop here, like that it could be that we're not talking about changing one person's job, that the cuts could go much deeper than that. But we'll have to let the dust settle a little bit. Like I don't have a lot of hard reporting to share, but just from my early conversations in the last few days, like my sense is the cuts here could be pretty deep. And I don't know who and what that's going to be, and really got to happen quickly now. I mean, that's the crazy reality of sports is in the alternate timeline, the Leafs are preparing for game 1 of the Eastern Conference Final on Tuesday. In reality, they got 6 weeks until free agency, a little less than that until the draft. They have, they have RFA decisions to make, qualifying offers to make. In the meantime, they have to look at the buyout window. Is there anyone they want to use there? And they have to decide who's making those decisions. And so that's got to happen pretty quickly here.
Not to go back on Marner, but I'd like to know your thoughts on how he and Auston Matthews, and maybe this should be more focused on Auston Matthews. I'd like to know your thoughts on how those two responded in the locker room when talking to you guys after Game 7 and some of the comments that kind of flew out, whether it's Marner talking about how much playing for the Leafs meant to him or Auston Matthews saying that there were too many passengers in Game 7. I'd love to know your thoughts on how those two guys responded after that game.
Well, I'll say this. That was one of the more surreal post games I've ever covered. Maybe the most surreal, quite honestly. The Leafs, and I've been at every one of these games in the playoffs with this core. The Leafs were different post last night probably because everyone recognizes everything I'm saying here, that, finally, truly, there's going to be significant change at the heart of the roster, at minimum. And so, Marner, first of all, almost jumped into past tense, if you read his quote closely, when asked about what it's meant to be Maple Leaf, which, given everything I've already said the last 2 episodes about what I think he's going to do on July 1st, maybe isn't a surprise. But, that was the first real hint. It's been an honor to wear this jersey and be among the franchise legends and this and that. But he talked like someone whose 10-year run with the organization is ending. Auston Matthews, I think he was frustrated. And, the Passengers comment is probably not going to play well in the market, because I think it appears as though you're blaming other people while maybe not blaming yourself. And maybe that's the case. I think this is an example of where those guys are feeling the strain of being singled out so much. Marner and Matthews in particular took the biggest criticism, right? Like, one thing that isn't talked about a lot, William Nylander did not have a distinguished end to this series.
No, he did not.
And, William has earned some degree of benefit of the doubt because he really has consistently scored big goals and put up good playoff numbers for the team. And, frankly, the biggest reason the Leafs were up 2-0 in the series with a chance to win Game 3 was Nylander's line with Tavares dominated the first couple games. And where things started to shift in series is when the Panthers changed their matchups and put Lundell line on Matthews, and that put Barkov on the Nylander line. And all of a sudden, Florida started having a lot more success in shutting down the Nylander line. But I think, I don't know what Austin was referencing or who exactly, but I just think that, he's feeling the weight of all the blame. And look, and ultimately he's the captain. He's the highest paid player. He's a former Hart Trophy winner, multiple time goal scoring champion who didn't score enough goals in the playoffs. I mean, that's part of the deal. But, I'll be curious to see. That's one of those comments. I just want to see how it reverberates. Like, how does he approach that again when the Leafs have their locker cleanout day? Does he maybe put a little bit more context around that comment? Because I think you can take it various ways. But man, it was obviously there's anger or sadness every time any team loses. Like, we've now seen 12 teams get beat out of the playoffs through the first 2 rounds. Like, there's anger and sadness in all those rooms, but there's a different feeling this time in Toronto. I think, eventually it's so obvious, like, you can't even hide, right? Like, you can't even, like, it's just like, holy shit, this again.
Yeah, you have that right. We should also talk about how dominant the Panthers were in that game. It's one thing for the Leafs to put on the performance that they did, but when you're getting hemmed into your own end, and then when you finally weather that storm, and then Sergei Bobrovsky is standing on his head, and then Seth Jones is playing probably the best game he's played as a Panther, and we already mentioned the fact that Brad Marchand was balling throughout not just that game, but in the series as well. Like, the Panthers did so many things right in that Game 7. This wasn't just the Leafs laying an egg here. This was this was the defending Cup champion standing up and playing absolute crazy baller hockey when they absolutely needed to. They deserve that win.
This is why you're such a great host. We're only 40 minutes into the show, and we finally have given the other team some love. But you're absolutely right. And it's funny. I don't know if you saw the quote before the game from Matthew Tkachuk, but he's like, we're built for Game 7s. Like, we wear you down. I think that quote proved kind of prescient, because eventually they just broke the Leafs, right? The first 21 shot attempts in Game 7 were from Florida. And give the Leafs credit. First of all, they withstood that attack. They didn't give up a ton of high dangers in those 21. And the Leafs in the second half of the first period, at that point, easily could have grabbed the lead. Had multiple breakaways, and they actually dominated the second half of the first period. So you get to the first intermission, the Leafs are up 7-3 in high danger chances. It's 0-0 on the scoreboard. I would argue the Leafs are in a good place there. And then what do the Panthers do in the second period? They just lean on them and destroy them. And that first goal from Seth Jones, in my opinion, the game was over there.
Yep.
1-0 with whatever, 20, 30 something minutes left. And it's over when the Panthers score that goal. And it was such a clinic. If you watch that breakout, coming up the ice, Barkov, Rodriguez on the sideboard, just a little touch pass where he catches Jones on the move, and Riley's beat just by one little 5-foot pass off the wall. Like the Panthers are so situationally aware on the ice. And then Jones comes down. It's a 2-on-1. Carlo gives him too much room, and he just buries a shot. That's a clinical goal. And that one and the third one, if you watch back the third goal, like Florida had like 5 or 6 like battles won in a row on the forecheck. And a couple of them, the Leafs player got to the puck first. But they were just under such pressure, they couldn't relieve the pressure, right? They couldn't make a move to just get a little bit of space, to take a breath, to get the puck out. And ultimately it ends up in the back of the net. I mean, the Panthers was a clinic. And it will not surprise me if the Panthers win the Stanley Cup after this, which probably makes things even worse if you're Toronto in a way, like, because you know how close you were, but then how far you were when it got to the business end of the series. Like you got dismantled in Game 7, just absolutely clinicked to death. So yeah, I mean, less words being spoken and written about the Panthers on this morning. But there will be many more to be said about them this playoffs, I suspect. I mean, look, we'll see the Carolina series, and I know we're not going to talk too much about what's to come, but the Hurricanes, this will be their biggest challenge. That's fair to say of the playoffs after dispatching New Jersey and Washington in short order to come out of the Metro. They've had a lot of days off here, or at least some days off. Probably will take a little bit of time to get into that series. Like I'm guessing Game 1 will almost be a little bit weird because you're just all of a sudden, it's like a quick shift of perspective if you're Florida, and plus Carolina's coming off. But yeah, the Panthers, they have everything you could want. And last hat tip for me is to Seth Jones, who, well, Marchand might have been, in my view, the best player in the series. Seth Jones, in my view, is the best player on the ice in Game 7. He had an absolute standout game, was so good, dancing the line, making plays with his legs in terms of just doing what the Panthers need. And look, he was an in-season trade, right? He played half the season or a little more in Chicago, was very frustrated with his situation there, and man is making a hell of a case with his new lease on life. That was the first Game 7 of his career, and he made it a memorable one. Could have had a hat trick in the game, frankly. Yep. There's the one goal that he scored that came off the board. I don't think we need to waste any energy or time on that, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, even if he only scored the one goal, he scored the goal that ended the Leafs season in my eyes. And dominant performance from Florida.
Yeah, I feel with the way that we've gone about talking about the Leafs and the Panthers, I'm cool with just leaving this episode as just a look back at that and a look ahead for Toronto. And with respect to the other series and some of the other storylines, we can get to that on Thursday. Unless there was another final thought you want to mention about the Leafs and this Game 7, we could leave it here, Siege. I think you brought some fire to that.
Yeah, and look, by the time we get to Thursday, I suspect we'll have had the Leafs locker clean out. Perhaps some news will start to trickle out by then. I mean, we'll move beyond kind of everything that happened in Game 7 and be deeper into the offseason. We'll also see both conference finals get underway Tuesday in Carolina, and then Wednesday, Dallas and Edmonton get going. My only other thought would be we didn't touch at all on the end of the Winnipeg Jets season. And, it's a hard pivot, and I don't even want to seem like we're just paying lip service to it, but it was pretty emotional. Like I felt emotional sitting on my couch, watching that Game 6, after Mark Scheifele's dad had died overnight, and he played in that game, he scores a goal, and then of course he's in a penalty box when Dallas ultimately wins the game in overtime. And everything that happened from the moment that the series ended, like Thomas Harley scores in overtime, from Adam Lowry going into the penalty box to get his buddy out of there, to the way the Jets crowded around him. We saw a lot of them exchanging long, hugs with Scheifele, a lot of words, and some of those, it's almost like you didn't want to let go. And then he goes through the handshake line, and my goodness, whether it's the the exchange with Jamie Benn or Mason Marchand, who obviously lost his father a couple years ago. I mean, it was powerful stuff. It was, I think that the reason I want to mention it, honestly, is I don't want it. We tend to like be on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing. But I think we should at least take a moment to just say a pretty unbelievable, I guess, show of courage from Mark Scheifele to show up on what had to be one of the hardest days, if not the hardest day of his life, and still do what he loves, still fight with his teammates. Some of this stuff is it's just a game at the end of the day. I think perspective's easy to look at. It was emotional to watch that. And I think it's something, quite honestly, whenever these playoffs are said and done, whatever happens from here on out, I think that'll be one of the more defining moments of the 2025 Stanley Cup playoffs. I think people remember that for a long time. And, obviously we send our best to Mark and his family and to the Jets too. I think they did everything they could to try to win the game for their buddy too. And a lot of teams talk about being a family, but I think that team in particular really has that vibe going on. They've had a lot of long-term players there, including Lowry and Scheifele and Josh Morrissey and a bunch of others. They've had one general manager in their history, right? Kevin Cheveldayoff. Mark Chipman, the chairman of the team, is very involved. He's not just a guy who sits in a suit drinking wine during the game and entertaining his buddies. I mean, he's in the battle with the players. And so, yeah, really just, I guess maybe end by saying to Mark, we don't do stick taps on Monday usually, but I think we can make an exception for this show just to, that was such a touching moment. And I think in a lot of ways you're defined not by what you do when you feel the best or on your best day. It's what you do when you're under the biggest amount of pain, struggle, whatever you want to call it. And I mean, he showed up and then some for everybody.
I think that's really well said, CJ. That's really well said. And we can leave it there for everyone who tapped into our show today, whether on YouTube, whether through audio. Thank you so much for your time. We'll be back later this week with a new episode of The CJ Show. Thanks so much for listening.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.